Well, on behalf of Judy and myself, we're very pleased to be with you again back in Seattle. It's lovely to see you. We have brought some resources with us, and we are grateful that we've already sold some of them because we were pretty close to the excess baggage when we came, and we really don't want to be over it when we leave. So I've just brought two to show you. These are books that I've written, and they tend to be relating to the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, mainly because I suspect that the better appreciation we have of the Father and the Son and the Spirit, the more stable we will be in our lives as Christians, and we will walk with a greater spring in our step when we realize their utter commitment to us. And so that's my focus, is not to delve into the depths of the complexity of what it is to be Jesus or the Father or the Spirit so much as to recognize the enormity of the grandeur of the Father and the Spirit, and on the basis of that to be shocked that such beings should want to be committed to us practically. And so this one was the first one I ever wrote, and it was written because my wife said we never get enough sermons on God. And then I began to think about the books that are written about God. And they tend to be this thick, not this thick. And they are full of complexity. And they tend to push God further away. This is a gentle journey into who God is. In fact, it's called a life-changing adventure. It's for all Christians, young Christians. It's used as a post-alpha piece of work, but it's valuable for all Christians. And this one, if you find yourself nodding off in the next half an hour and you think, oh, that's a shame, I would have liked to have heard what he had said, but it's too late because I've nodded off, the sermon is here. Because this is a book that is dedicated to the miracles of Jesus, the healings, the exorcisms, and the other astounding miracles that he created. And the strapline is, what are they there for? Why so many miracles? I mean, for goodness sake, we know that Jesus healed a blind man. You don't need to tell us 3 times. We've got the message. But they are there, each of them, told differently by Matthew, Mark, and Luke, John, with the perspective of teaching us something about Jesus. Insofar as Jesus comes not just as Savior, not just as Messiah, not just as a remarkable prophet, but he comes as God, squashed into a human body. That's the fundamental purpose of Jesus coming to this earth. It's to allow people to appreciate what God's like. Because without Jesus being present, all we would have would be the revelations of God through the prophets of the Old Testament. And Isaiah will speak about his holiness. Amos will speak about the social concern of God. Hosea will speak about the forgiveness of God. But when Jesus comes, you get the whole picture of God. That's why he's called the Son of God, because the Son best reflects the Father in a first century setting. That's why he's not called the brother of God or the cousin of God. He's the Son of God, because people understand the significance of what it is to be a son. The best reflection of the Father is in the Son. Jesus as the Son gives us a perfect picture of who the Father is. So when you see the life of Jesus, as you will in my talk this morning, you will not just be getting a lovely reflection of God, of Jesus, but you'll also be getting a lovely reflection of who God is. And that's what that book is about. But let me get to what I'm here for, which is to talk about a story that you know well. I love to refer to stories that you know well, because partly you're going to think this is a short story because you know the story is going to end, because you know what it is, and it won't be a long sermon, not as long as Peter's anyway, and I don't know how long Peter's sermons are. That was just a joke. But this is a story that you think you know why it was written, because it is a story where the person concerned gets healed. That's not the reason why the story is told. This is not a story where Jesus is identified as the healer, although he is. This is a story where Jesus puts the focus away from himself onto the person in the story. Let me set this up. Last week we had the privilege to revisit Alaska. And we were there treated to the grandeur of God's creative abilities as we cruised up the inside passage. And it was no wonder to me that when God created the world in Genesis, that he looked at it and concluded, it's good. It was good. He was pleased with what he had created. Or put it differently, creation pleased God. Creation pleased the Lord. When was the last time that you pleased the Lord? When was the last time that I pleased the Lord? When was the last time that we pleased the Lord? And how do we know when we've pleased the Lord? I suspect that we might have some suggestions, and the suggestions are so significantly high that we might be drawn to the conclusion that we don't please the Lord as much as we would like to. I think we set too high a target, and the story I want to explore with you today is to recognize that we please the Lord far more often than we realize, and in ways that would surprise us. And we're going to look at a lady who is seemingly being chosen deliberately as the most unlikely person to please the Lord. And she's carefully set up by Matthew, by Mark, and Luke, because they each record her story, as if we will never be drawn to the conclusion that this lady is likely to please Jesus. It's impossible. But the fact is, she thrills him to bits. And what's even more remarkable than that is how she does it, because it looks far too ordinary, far too simple. And I'm expecting something much more cataclysmic that she should have done to please the Lord. And Jesus said, actually, it's a lot easier than you think to please me. So let's read her story. If you've got your text in front of you, I'm reading it from Luke. But the story is actually told in Matthew and Mark. This is one of these stories that is repeated in more than one of the Gospels. And there are not many of them. But on this occasion, each of the Gospel writers has put together two stories of two women. And the number 12 is significant in each story. The one story is of a little girl who's 12 years old, and the other story is a lady who for 12 years has had a blood disorder. We're going to read it from chapter 8 of Luke, verse 40. When Jesus had returned, the crowd welcomed him. They were all waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue, and falling at Jesus' feet, he besought him to come to his house. He had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. And as he went, the people pressed around him. And a woman who had had a flow of blood for 12 years and couldn't be healed by anyone came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. And immediately her flow of blood was ceased. And Jesus said, "Who touched me?" When everybody denied it, Peter said, "Master, the multitudes surround you and press upon you." And Jesus said, No, somebody touched me, because I perceive that power has gone forth from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling, and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him, and how she'd been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." As in all of the stories in the Gospels, the writers don't want us to just read them and then move to the next story. They want us to think about what they've said, why they've said what they've said, why they've chosen the particular words that they've chosen in the telling of the story, because these are interactions that they intend to have with us, not simply writing as historians. So that's what we will do. We will revisit this story, and we could do the same with the story in Matthew and then the same with the story in Mark if we had the time, but we don't. So we're just focusing on what Luke says, to hear what Luke is trying to say to his readers. And remember, Luke's readers are not Jewish Christians. They are largely non-Jewish Christians, And they don't have a history of a God who cares for them. The gods that they have in the ancient first century Greco-Roman pantheon of gods, these gods are dominated by one word, apatheia in the Greek. They are apathetic towards people. They couldn't care less. You can pray to them, you can worship them, but don't, for goodness sake, expect them to respond. Why should they? They're not interested in you. And Luke is presenting to his readers Jesus, who is a God who is totally unlike them. And on this occasion, he's going to be addressing the issue how this Jesus can be pleased by the most unlikely of characters. And I'm reading the story, and I've read the story, and I'm thinking, I'm sorry, but I can't see it here. I don't know what she did that was so special, because I don't see that she did anything special. Well, let's revisit the story. Well, who was she? This presumptuous woman. Who did she think she was to interrupt the polite request of the most important man in the community, Jairus, the synagogue leader, who comes and beseeches Jesus and kneels in front of him and begs him to come and touch his dying daughter? Who does this woman think she is to be able to break into that mission? In fact, because she does it, the girl dies. How on earth is she likely to please Jesus, given that set of consequences? Well, what we learn about her from the story is that she was desperate. Desperate for a number of reasons. Mainly desperate because she's been bleeding for 12 years. She has this disorder, and despite going to all the doctors that she can, she has not been able to fix the problem, and she now has no money left. But there's more to it than that in a Jewish environment, because according to the laws of Leviticus, that means that this woman is constantly living in ceremonial uncleanness. In other words, if somebody touches her, or indeed if somebody comes into close proximity to her, they become ceremonially unclean and have to go through a period of isolation for 7 days before they can come back into the community. So her life is one of abject loneliness as well as hopelessness, because the law says you must not come close to anybody else. But it's worse than that. Because of her blood disorder, that means that she cannot possibly get married. So her future is even more hopeless than her present. No husband, no children, no grandchildren. She's on her own. She's helpless and she's hopeless. But then consider that it's worse than that, because she will assume, as did most of the people in the first century in the Jewish world, she will assume that she is ill because she has sinned. She will confess as many sins as she can, but she is still ill, and so the conclusion that she draws in her logic is, God has obviously not forgiven me, because if he had have forgiven me, then the blood disorder would have ended. The fact that it hasn't ended means that I am still unforgiven. Maybe I am unforgivable. She's on her own, seriously ill, seriously helpless, no future, and it appears that God has abandoned her, and she will, wrongly, but she will conclude that she deserves this. She is not the kind of person who should anticipate anything positive from Jesus, especially as he is the representative of God. You see, it's one thing for an impressive ruler of a synagogue to ask for help from Jesus. You might even think that he merits it, he deserves it because of his position. But for her, what has she got to offer? Nothing. A forlorn hope is what she has, and even that forlorn hope has drifted down to a hopelessness. But there's a glimmer of light because Jesus is there in her situation. And Jesus allows his mission to a dignified ruler to be interrupted by this undignified, marginalized, unclean, according to the law, woman who could not be any more lonely and isolated than she currently is. And Jesus, here's the point, Jesus will focus on her first. He doesn't say, okay, I'll come back and deal with you later, but I'm en route to this man's daughter, but trust me, I'll be back. No, on the contrary, Jesus deals with this forlorn, friendless woman first, despite her lack of credibility and deservingness of the time of Jesus. And the extra truth is we're going to discover that he's thrilled to bits with what she does. Well, what does she do? Because I can't see it yet. Well, you'll remember that I said that when the ruler came to Jesus, he knelt down and politely requested the help of Jesus. That's the way you should do it. And Jesus followed him to his home. This woman does not politely request help from Jesus. In fact, she doesn't have any confidence that Jesus would give her help. Why should she? God hasn't in the past. Why should this representative of God give her help in the present? It's completely unlikely. In fact, we're told that she was fearful and she trembled before Jesus. She trembled. It's the only time anybody in the Gospels trembles before Jesus. This is the status of this woman who comes before Jesus expecting nothing, and yet she is going to be put into the center of the spotlight. And, I'm not going to tell you because I'm just a little bit ahead of myself. But it's a remarkable change around for this woman, such a significant change around that the healing is less significant than the adulation that Jesus offers to her. So what does she do? Well, she knows that Jesus could heal her. She doesn't know that Jesus will heal her, but she knows that he could. But whether he would, that's a different matter. In fact, it's probably a wild dream that will never be fulfilled. So rather than her asking Jesus for help, she decides to touch Jesus. Well, not to touch him, but to touch his garment. And she believes that that will be sufficient to bring about a transformation in her life. In fact, the Gospel of Matthew says that she believed that a single touch would be enough for Jesus to transform her life. And so she does. She touches his garment. And you know where she touches his garment. She touches the hem of the garment, the fringe of his garment. This woman who lives on the margins, the fringes of her society, she touches the fringe of Jesus' robe, the bit that drifts through the dust. Perhaps that's as much as she thinks she can do. She doesn't grasp onto it. She doesn't tug onto it. She doesn't embrace the gown, the robe. She just touches the fringe of the garment, and that's all she deserves, she may have thought. But you will notice that's not the only thing she does, because she doesn't, as the ruler does, come before Jesus and kneel in front of him, but she skirts around the back of Jesus and comes from behind. She doesn't want to disturb Jesus. She knows that she shouldn't be there. She is a walking wounded person. She is ritually making everybody else present unclean, if only they realized who she was. And she is contaminating Jesus by touching his garment. She knew that she shouldn't be there. She's a walking embarrassment. What right did she have to receive anything from him? And so rather than disturb him, rather than interrupt him, rather than slow him down from going to this rich ruler, she touches him from the rear. She doesn't want to be in his way. She doesn't want to be a nuisance. I think there are times in our lives when we feel we may be a bit of a nuisance with the Lord. We've come to him again, asking for his forgiveness about something that we've already asked his forgiveness for more than once. And despite trying to stop what it was that we were doing, we find ourselves kneeling before him and asking for his support not to do it again. Or maybe we have just wanted to talk to him, but we're nervous that there's more important people than us. And maybe we're just a little unconfident with the likelihood that he might be pleased to see us. Well, all of these thoughts are flooding through her mind, and life gets a whole pile worse when Jesus says, "Who touched me? Who touched me?" Even Peter says, in effect, "For goodness sake, Jesus, don't be stupid. Everybody's touching you. They can't stop touching you. There are so many people here." But Jesus says, no, somebody touched me, and I want to know who it was. Well, surely to goodness, he knew who it was that he was referring to. He's not daft, he's God. He knows everything about everyone. The reason he asks the question is not so that she can identify herself to him so that he knows. The reason Jesus asked the question is that she then can identify herself as the one who did it, so that she can then be the focus of his attention, so that he can then say, "Wonderful, what you have done is marvelous." Really? She just touched your garment, Jesus. That sounds a bit magical to me. That sounds a bit like superstition. She should have been more like the ruler who knelt in front of you and asked you the question. That's the proper way to receive healing, not to touch your garment, for goodness sake. That's just being magical. But Jesus does not ask her to have more faith. He does not ask her to have faith. He acknowledges that what she did was exactly all that was needed for her to bring about the transformation in her life. And even more, all that she did was all that was needed for her to recognize that she pleased him more than she realized. Why? Because she believed he was on her side. She believed that he could help her. She believed that he had the authority to help her. And that acknowledgement on her part, was sufficient for her to gain his pleasure. Do you see what Jesus does? And this is no evidence for what I've been saying, that it's true. The first thing that Jesus does is, and it's in verse 48, he says to her, because we don't get any words from the lady, it's all words from Jesus. The first thing that he says is, "Daughter." Daughter. To a woman who will never have a daughter because of the blood disorder, Jesus calls her daughter. To a woman who doesn't have a father coming to present her to Jesus as his daughter, as the rich ruler did with his 12-year-old little girl, to that woman who is completely on her own, Jesus calls her daughter. And she's the only adult in the Gospels that Jesus refers to as a daughter. The only one. She is more special than she would dare believe. Yes, she is scared. Yes, she does tremble. Yes, she's nervous as to what's going to happen, because maybe Jesus, now he finds out who it is who has touched me. Now he's going to reprimand her. Now he's going to give her the telling off that she deserves. She's broken Levitical laws. Now is the chance for her to remember her place in society as a marginalized, undignified person, ceremonially unclean. But quite the contrary, Jesus doesn't do that at all. Doesn't refer to her action, and certainly doesn't refer to her action as something deficient or something that needed improvement or something that was undeserving of his involvement in her life. Quite the contrary. He identifies that simple act of touching the hem of his garment as faith. Faith, yes, faith, because she knew he was on her side. That's why she did it. She knew he could help. That's why Jesus acknowledges it as faith. She knew that he had the authority to help her in a situation. When Jesus asked the question, "Who touched me?" she was ready to run away, but it was too late. She had to acknowledge who it was, and she does. But when she acknowledges that it was her who touched him, then that gives Jesus the opportunity to put her in the center and to put the focus on her, so that everybody else will hear his words, including you and me as the readers of this story, that Jesus does care. And he cares sufficiently to include the excluded who don't feel that they deserve to be included at all, let alone to receive anything positive from Jesus. The crowd fills the story, but this lady is central to the story. And it's, for a moment, it's as if the world stopped still. just so that Jesus can acknowledge, what you have done is wonderful. It thrills my heart, makes me so happy, because you have recognized something about me that lots of people do not recognize, that I'm on your side, God, on your side. You've recognized that, and you haven't had a great deal of knowledge in the past to have based that truth on, but you have recognized it. I am on your side, and the fact that you've realized it thrills me to bits. We don't have any recorded words from the lady, but we do have recorded words from Jesus, because he continues and he says, your faith has made you well, go in peace. In other words, he's inviting her into a relationship with himself, because the healing has happened in passing. He didn't pronounce the healing, it just happened, because Jesus can do that kind of thing. She's been physically healed, but she has now been introduced to Jesus not just as a healer, but as somebody who's on her side and wishes to have a relationship with her, a savior in a comprehensive sense. But there's one final thing, and then I'm through. And it's only Luke who squeezes this little piece of information into the story. He says, someone touched me because I perceive that power has gone forth from me. I perceive that power has gone forth from me. Now, what does that mean? I suspect that some people think that every time Jesus healed or cast out a demon or did some kind of mighty act, that a little bit of supernatural energy drained from him. Implication being that by the end of the day, he was absolutely exhausted, lost all his power, and had to go have another recharge from the Father. That, I think, is absolute nonsense, because Jesus is God. Jesus never runs out of energy. It's impossible for him to run out of energy. He is the sustainer of the universe then, before he was born, and now. So it isn't a reference to the fact that Jesus sensed, oh no, another little bit of energy has gone from me. I need to refill myself up a little bit later. No, that's not the point. The point is particularly significant to his readers, Luke's readers. Remember, I said they are non-Jewish readers. They have no concept of a God who is interested in them at all, unless you're the emperor or some significant person. But for most of the people in the world, the gods couldn't care less about you. And the message that Luke is saying is this: when Jesus touches somebody, something leaves him, and it is received by the person who benefits from him. Does it need to function like that? No. Jesus could just touch the person, they could be transformed, and it could make no difference to him at all. It would be more than easy for that to happen. But the message is that when Jesus touches us, something of him leaves him to come to us. In other words, it makes a difference to us, but it also makes a difference to him. So he could have touched that woman or healed that woman, and it made no difference to his stability in his life. His level of equanimity could have just been exactly the same as it was before and after. But the message from Luke is, no, whenever Jesus makes a difference in somebody else's life, it makes a difference in him as well. Because he doesn't just want to minister to us from a distance. He is not just observing us from the other side of the universe. He does it not just with proximity of geography, but he does it in the sense that I want to make a difference in your life, and I would love it if that makes a difference to me as well, because we partner in the process together. He doesn't just walk with us, from another world, but he touches us in ways that mean that he and we feel the difference. And our response is that we reach to Jesus and take advantage of such a unilaterally committed person who is on our side. How did she please Jesus? Was it by touching his garment? Well, if so, I'll never have the chance to do that, because he's not walking around with the garment. But Jesus says, you please me, Keith, every time you realize I'm on your side. You please me, Keith, every time you realize that I am God. You please me every time you realize that I can do everything. It's not because he needs my adulation or my commendation, but he has come to give me an appreciation of the remarkable nature of God. And when we begin to believe that that is true, then we achieve what he came in the first place so to do. So our response is to say, we do believe in you, Lord. We want to do more than just believe in you. We want to do more than recognize that you're on our side. But just knowing that is quite sufficient to make a difference today, this week, especially because this week I don't know what's happening. But knowing that you're on my side means that I can walk with confidence into the future, knowing that the one who controls the universe, who is also committed to be on my side. A remarkable Jesus. Let me pray. Father, if I was that lady, I would have been thrilled to have been healed. I would have been amazed to have heard Jesus call me daughter, and for Jesus to identify the simple act that I did as sufficient for him to be pleased, because it indicated that she recognized that Jesus was on her side. Well, Lord, help us this week to increasingly realize the truth that you're on our side, not just by our side, but on our side. And therefore, because of that, we live this life in the context of safety. May that make a difference, I pray. Amen.